Our Collaborative Leaders Huddle, of course, sponsored by Verus Global, where we understand what you understand. Organizations that are not aligned fail customers and employees. That's why we all work so hard to quickly align teams to their critical imperatives so they can consistently succeed. I'm Craig Ross, your host, CEO of Verus Global. I'm truly honored to be with you and joining so many of you from around the world. My co-host is none other than Kyle, the amazing Shelley. Kyle, say hello to our network and provide a few instructions as we get into our discussion.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for everyone hopping on. Hopefully you have a big cup of coffee ready to rock and roll this morning. Just some quick housekeeping. So if you've been on the Collaborative Leaders Huddle before, we have a ton of questions and we try to get through all of them. So if you do have questions, especially surrounding the topic today of being able to lead without authority, be able to put those questions in the comments. I will get to as many as I can, I promise. But go ahead and put those in there as soon as you think of them, and we'll get to as many of you as we can. So good to see you all this morning.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. And now it's my honor and privilege to introduce our guest for the Huddle, this week's Huddle. It's Keith Ferrazzi. And for those of you who know a little bit about Keith's work, if you don't, you really should. Keith is a New York Times #1 bestseller with several books, Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back. His new book is coming out here on the 26th of this month. I've already pre-ordered mine. The title is Leading Without Authority: How the New Power of Co-Elevation Can Break Down Silos, Transform Teams, and Reinvent Collaboration. I got to tell you, be quite transparent, this is precisely why we invited Keith to join us. He's a forward thinker like everybody in this network. He's an innovative thinker, and he's working and has access to some of the top leadership teams, organizations that you and I recognize around the world. And he's influencing those thinkers, those leaders, in terms of how they're leading those organizations, because we have to collaborate differently today. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Keith Ferrazzi. Say hello, Keith.
Craig, Kyle, how are you guys doing today? And everybody, good morning.
Good morning, Keith. We're doing quite well. Our network's excited to have you. Thanks for making the time out of your busy schedule, promoting your new book, working with your clients. The Huddle expects big things, so we're going to go right to our big question and come right at you, Keith, and then we'll riff from there. Our big question that folks saw when they were registering, of course, is how do we lead? How do we lead successfully and influence others when we don't have authority over them? So many cross-functional teams, and this is a big deal when it comes to successfully collaborating. How do we do it, Keith?
Well, I'll tell you two ways. First of all, the assumption that you ever had authority over anybody in leadership was bullshit anyway. The reality is people show up at 150% because they want to. You might, with authority, get 75% of somebody, but we can't afford that. If we want to be transformational in outcomes today, we've got to make sure that we've got everybody's heart and soul into the project. So the question is how? It's by co-creation. The very first person you invite into your team, you're inviting them into their team. That's the tipping point. You have to believe humbly that you do not have the answer. It's going to be through the collaborative action. That's how you're going to get the answer. And as a result of the intention to co-create, the intention to what I call co-elevate, go higher together. With that intention, people are going to want to join the team and go take that hill together. And the book talks about a series of steps. But the first, damn it, is the awakening that your team is everybody you need to get the job done. And you're a co-creator with that group of individuals. It's a different way to think about leadership.
Oh, for sure. For sure, a different way to think about leadership. And this idea of thinking that, imagining that we're actually inviting people to be a part of a team, part of a project, can be simply profound from a mindset standpoint. Question for you, and then I'll come back over to Kyle after this one, see what we have for questions from our network. But first, Keith, what happens if I'm working with someone who doesn't feel like they didn't necessarily get invited, were forced to work on a project together? I didn't select them, even though I'm functioning with this mindset of, hey, I invite you and I'm seeing that we can do this together, but they're being stubborn with it, with an outdated mindset. What suggestions do you have for me?
Well, look, again, that is the work of a leader. The work of a leader is to earn the heart and the soul of an individual to create great things. And there's a perspective that you need to lead with, is fully understanding what success is for that individual. Why would that individual engage with you? And there's a whole wheel of activities, that almost like a checklist, so to speak, that we walk you through. What are the motivations of a human to show up? Some
I think we've got a lock on Keith's.
in this isolated, did I cut out there? Or you got me.
I cut out for just a second. Go ahead. Right after
Okay.
motivations, go ahead, repeat that part.
Look, the motive, sometimes people just show up because they want to belong. And that's table stakes. But you as a leader have got to be the kind of person that invite people to join something important and powerful and something that's connected, right? So if you can create that space, there's a chapter in the book called Serve, Share, and Care. How do you create a group of individuals, right, that are a tribe, that have a sense of purpose? Now, sometimes people need to join in service of their career. How can being a part of your team advance their career? How do they see that advancement? The project itself might not be mission critical to their job, but they've been seconded over here, as you've suggested, as a possibility. But how do you make sure you brag on these people as they perform? There's an entire chapter in here about celebration. How do you use celebration of the people that you're engaging with in order to elevate them in the eyes of the people that matter to them, right? I remember when I was a very young leader, I had a young man, he's now doing incredibly well. His name's Frank Conju. And anytime, once or twice a year, when I saw him do something exceptional, I called his dad. His dad's since passed, but this was a kid that was in his 20s. I called his dad and I'd say, Mr. Conju, I just want to let you know, your son is just killing it here. And I thank you so much for raising this young man, because he's doing such a great job here. Now, his old man didn't even go to college, right? This was a manual laborer. And I just loved on this guy in front of his dad. And you talk about the motivation. This kid started at our company emptying waste paper baskets, right? He was an intern. And this kid had more drive, more ambition, more energy, right? So anyway, the point is you start to see some of the things that you do as a leader, but also just the act of co-creation, where people feel like they're contributing to something significantly, right? That we sit in teams. 71% of teams, individuals who are on teams, claim they get no value from being a part of the team. 74% of people sitting on teams today claim they do not have the capacity to challenge openly in the room. Now, Craig, I know that you don't believe that, but you see it all the time. The work we all need to do as leaders is to reboot, totally, and I call it reboot. We need to reboot the way that a team engages with a team. I've been researching this for 20 years. This methodology brought General Motors out of bankruptcy. The CFO of General Motors said, thank God for this, because this is what brought them out of bankruptcy. We're working with Delta Airlines through this right now, right? We've worked with some of the most impressive and inspiring organizations, and this methodology transforms teams that transform the world.
It's a reboot. It's a reboot for sure. And as we come to our network for questions, I want to share an insight I just had. We often challenge our clients as a leader. We should know the single greatest motivator of everybody we lead. And now what you're adding is actually my peers. It's my cross-functional peers. Am I taking the time to actually understand what is it that makes them tick? What is it that drives them? Beautiful example, Keith.
Yeah, and let me, again, chapter 1, who's your team? Chapter 1, who's your team? Your team has nothing to do with who reports to you. Get that out of your head. It is irrelevant. Stop it. The team, so it's so interesting because we even have these mindsets that lock us into a set of behaviors. How's your team doing? Susan, how's your team doing? And Susan instantly thinks, how are the people doing that report to me? How are the people doing on my project team. And then, and I'm not accusing Susan, I'll just make up some name, David. And then on the other hand, how about these individuals? Oh, we got to get buy-in from them. What the hell, buy-in? Who wants to be sold to, right? Just these mindsets that we have associated with those who are in the inner circle, those that aren't in the inner circle, based on positional authority and title, it is irrelevant. It is irrelevant. What matters is who do we need on board to achieve extraordinary transformational outcomes. That is our team.
Well put, well put. Let's transition to Kyle, tap into our network of thought leaders out there. Kyle, what do we got?
Yeah, and I appreciate you getting us rocking and rolling, Keith. I don't even need my coffee now. I like the energy. It's good stuff. And I've known Keith for a long time.
I needed mine, that's for sure. I needed mine. 7 o'clock out here.
But that's what I appreciate about Keith. I've known you now for 7 or 8 years, and I had my company out in California, a small company, and Keith, he really did serve. He introduced me to a lot of people that I could never have gotten introductions to, and he had no reason to do that. We didn't have that much of a relationship in the beginning, and that was really that. You talked about serving, you talked about sharing, you talked about caring, and that team goes beyond who's on your individual team. And now years and years and years later, I think about you to invite you on at this because you hold a special place in my heart because you did that selfishly. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. And you mentioned something that I want to serve up as a question. You talked about 71% find no value being on a team. And then really 74% really don't feel comfortable, let's just call it psychological safety, speaking up and engaging in a team environment. What do you see as being the biggest barriers in there, Keith, when you're looking at these teams, working with executives, not just what they're saying, but what you're seeing as being the root cause of why people aren't getting value being on these teams that they're on?
Yeah, it's all about human psychology, right? So when we started our firm 20 years ago, I had the mission that I wanted to crack the code of human behavior in the workplace. Because at the essence of achieving great things, it's about each of our individual psychologies, and it's about our own insecurities. It's our own triggers. It's our own assumptions. What we're talking about is there are social contracts in this world, and social contracts exist that lead to behaviors. So there's a social contract of deference to authority, right? Well, deference to authority does not lead to transformational outcomes. It doesn't. You've got to break down deference. There's a social contract around indulgence. I mean, come on, let's admit it. Some of us have people in our lives that we have disliked for so long that we now enjoy the act. We don't necessarily say it that way, but the resentments have spun in us, and maybe it's not somebody in the workplace. Maybe it's a sister or a brother or something, but we have these, we stew in this, right? And actually there's the chapter is called It's All on You. And I talk about the 6 deadly excuses. One of them, frankly, is laziness. Do you know how much work that I'm talking about this is? It's real work. I'm not bullshitting you. I'm not coming along and saying, oh my God, this is the easiest thing in the world. You just have, no. You want to be transformational. You want to consistently create transformational outcomes. There's a set of things you have not been attending to. You just have not been attending to because we've been lazily staying within our boxes, doing the old job within the people that we thought mattered. But now there's an extended group of individuals that we need to treat differently, and it takes work. Now, the good news is while we're working with them anyway, we might as well work in this new way. The new way of work, the new way of engaging is equally as easy once you're in proximity, but sometimes it takes more time. There's no question. We talk about the 6 deadly excuses, and they're all born from human psychology. And they work, by the way, with your family. One of the things I love about my new book and this principle of co-elevation is I've applied it for my kids. I've got 2 foster boys. One is 12 and the other one is 16 when we got him. Now they're 21 and 25. And I've applied the same principles in trying to lead very difficult children. And by the way, this has made my relationship with my mother better.
Nice.
Excellent.
Cool.
Can you hear me still?
Question,
We've got some questions coming in the chat space.
Was that just like a game stopper? You don't mention mothers on this show? I mean,
No.
come on, you guys can laugh.
Yeah,
No,
no,
we
like once
definitely-
mothers come up, we instantly just shut you down. So that's the first warning, obviously. And we had a little break, I think, in the connection, but I'm going to swing over to Stephen Shaw. You have a really good question, so I don't want that to go by. If you want to take yourself off mute real quick, and then go ahead and ask that to Keith. So Stephen, if you get you on mute, go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, I guess my question is,
You're
oh, you
good.
got me? I'm good, okay. Yeah, so my question is, what do you do when the official leader, the person in charge, has created and kind of promotes a kind of a culture of negativity, of kind of like, or a zero-sum game where the success of one person is the failure of another?
Yeah. Well, look, that is a barrier, but not an insurmountable barrier. And again, I get into this very deeply in the chapter. It's all on you. We all have challenges in challenging people standing in our way of being the success and the leaders we'd like to be. You know, Stephen, I don't know if you're an entrepreneur or not, an entrepreneurial type or not, but when you're an entrepreneur and an obstacle gets put in front of you, you figure out your way around it. I mean, the kids that started Uber had plenty of lawyers telling them early on that they couldn't do what they wanted to do, right? And they did not consider anything insurmountable. And that's what we have to have, including an individual. So what I have seen in many organizations, I've coached teams where the CEO was a jackass. And my job was to get the team to bond as a team, independent of the jackass. And you do your best, right? And you do your best until you don't want to do it anymore. And the benefit is that when you do this, the people that you co-elevate with, they bring you joy. They bring you energy. You bring each other the kind of relationship that you want in your workplace. Now, if even after that, it's not enough, then you get the heck out of that company, right? That's a personal choice you have to make. But most of us just let that jackass define all of our relationships. Bullshit. They have no right to define my relationship with you, Stephen. Just because Kevin is a jackass, I have no right to define my relationship with you, because you and I still have whatever contract you and I create. And that's so important to recognize. You have power. You have power in relationship. And we lose our power. We give it away. We give it away and we end up living in misery. We end up stealing from shareholders because of that. We end up being victims, which is one of the 6 deadly excuses. We blame other people for the reason we are lazy and won't do the hard work with the people around us, despite the fact that this person is poisoning the environment. That's what that person is doing. Now the question, Stephen, is what are you doing?
Keith, I appreciate that
Thank you.
comment. In fact, I'll double back on something you said earlier. That's a lesson my mom taught me. We will talk about moms and this idea of actually being autonomous and reminding ourselves that it's actually always a choice. I appreciate your words, particularly because Stephen's question, well, we hear that a lot and it's hard. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge it's difficult to do, yet when we can do what you're talking about, Keith, we can actually elevate the norms. I'm gonna use your word then, co-elevate the norms. And then lesson Dad taught me was misery loves company.
Amen.
Eventually something's going to change. We could be a part of that change. I appreciate that.
And by the way, misery love company and your ability to be the North Star creating a tribe, which is a new way of being, is 100% within your responsibility. So you can create a new way among a group of individuals. You can become the North Star personally. I've seen it. I've seen it happen so many times. People are longing for this. We're tribal animals. You know this. You know, 70,000 years ago, when we were born as a species, we were born into tribes. And if we're not in a tribe back then, you were eaten by something. So it's a pretty deep instinctive idea. All of our work, all of our research is based on what I call working with gravity. I said this to my team early on. I said, we're never gonna bullshit people. We're gonna lean into the basic human needs, right? Look, I mean, look at what social media has done. You know, the basic human need of grandiosity and being seen, right, has bred an entire community of individuals taking selfies of their best life, pretending that that's who they are to everybody else, right? And that's a basic human, but there's also a basic human need, which is belonging, right? And the thing about those platforms, God bless the people who create all these things. They're doing beautiful things for us today. But I personally know the individuals who created these major platforms. I've known them for years. I've known them since they were very young, in their 20s as startup kids. And I mean, these kids are not relationally inclined. They're geeky engineers that don't understand how to work with people. And so they've created platforms using norms that plays to those introverted, frightened, insecure attributes, right? Your job is to play to the other attribute, the attribute of belonging, the attribute of caring, the attribute of needing to connect. You do that and you will have people flocking to you as a leader, flocking to you, because it's core to what we need as humans, as a human species. So we call that engineering to gravity. We only engineer to gravity. All the practices in the book, you'll see.
Keith, I got a follow-up question on that. And as I transition to that question, I know a lot of geeky engineers who are relationally inclined as well. And so I want to make sure we're stepping up for them. Your point's well made. You were a part of a quite extensive study, $2 million study with HBR about collaboration occurring in a virtual setting with leadership teams. This was pre-pandemic. So I can only imagine the value of that study now. What came out of that study that is a nugget or two that we could benefit from as it relates to co-elevation in a virtual world?
Well, I think the biggest rule, so I was doing work at Cisco for John Chambers. He was the CEO at the time. And we were coaching his executive team. And I really believed in that. This was before most of the platforms existed. You know, WebEx was early on, Telepresence, Tamberg, all those guys. And I believed John's belief that we're going to be increasingly remote. So I got him to give me $2 million, and we went on a 4-year research study. We published 28 different studies. All of these studies are at virtualteamswin.com, virtualteamswin.com. Published all the studies. We've done a lot of research around it. And what I can tell you is, at the end of the day, the simple rule is this: everything that makes work today, in the accidental, organic hallway conversations, what happens at the water cooler, in the lunchroom, etc., all of that needs to be re-engineered purposefully, right? So you gain psychological safety through small snippets of relational interaction in the hallways, so that when you get into the workplace, when you get into the scrimmage, the team meeting, you have more psychological safety, and therefore you can have more candor, right? But if you never have that, if you're just diving in and out of Zoom meetings all the time, and you don't have the intimate connection, what begins to occur is your crazy-headed reptilian brain, the worst part of tribalism, which is fear and being triggered, you know, a sense of being other, not us, starts to kick in, and you start to behave badly. Like that Stephen, the gentleman that you're talking about, this is a very insecure man. This is a man afraid of being hurt. So he creates this environment around him to keep him safe, right? That's the core of it. And it goes way back into early childhood wounds for this guy. And that might bring you a little bit of empathy. Instead of just having ire toward this jackass, start having a little bit of empathy and sympathy for how bad it must be to be him, right? And that starts to melt your heart a bit, and you can communicate differently with that in mind. So in a remote environment, we've had to take every aspect of what used to be buried in the organic, and we had to bring it up and make it purposeful. So at the beginning of every meeting, you do a very simple sweet and sour. A sweet and sour is you take 30 seconds with every person or less. What's going on right now, sweet and sour for you? Right? And everybody goes around really quick. And you don't have to do it every week, because if you're in the same team meeting every week, maybe it hasn't changed that much, right? But you have these punctuations. So a sweet, for instance, would be, I talked about my mom. My mom's 89 with asthma, but I finally got her locked down. She's safe. She's getting food delivered. And I feel that part of what I was worried about when all this, I feel comfortable there right now, right? So that's sweet. She's safe. What's sour? I'm struggling right now with my older boy who's never wanted to work. He's gone to jail 3 times. And I'm struggling with how much financial support I give him at this time, because I cut him off of financial support because of choices he was making. And now how much of the choices he's making are his choices. So I'm struggling with what to do there, right? Boom, done. Now that creates a sense of empathy and understanding of humanity when you do that among a team. Now you can go deeper to challenge each other. You can go deeper to take risks with each other, right? So that's just one little itty bitty. We actually, and you can, again, there's a whole recontracting at virtualteamswin.com. There's 8 elements you have to recontract with your team in a virtual environment to be more purposeful. 8 elements. And what I just talked about was the relational element.
Keith, thank you for sharing that resource with the network. That's valuable. And I want to reinforce as a method for collaborative leadership, the sour that you just shared in being vulnerable, powerful. You use the word, it takes us deeper, which of course causes us to elevate. Kyle, let's go back to our network questions that we can pull and ask Keith.
Yeah, and I'm going to combine some. So Keith, what you were just talking about, and I think I'm going to paraphrase this, but leaders are, in the last probably 5 years, are being, I think, seen as more vulnerable. At least a lot of them are stepping forward and they're having the candor like you've talked about, which is engaging the rest of the organization, the enterprise. A lot of our people that are on this Zoom call, they work on cross-functional teams, and they might fit in the statistics that you put in earlier, or they may lead those teams. For those individuals that are on the teams, for those individuals that want to lead and maybe they don't have the positional authority, it tends to be harder for them to step out with that kind of vulnerability and authenticity, or at least it's perceived that way. When you're the leader and the buck stops here, when you step out, there's really no ramifications coming down. It's endearing and people can step into it. When you're in that middle zone, maybe on some of those teams, there might be some fear of reprisal or somebody against you. So how do you get over that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not sure what reprisal is around vulnerability. I mean, certainly people could make fun, etc. I understand that sense of reprisal, but let me just sort of come back. The order is serve, share, and care. Serve, share, and care. You begin to open, and there's a word I created in the book, which is a metric for how good you're doing at opening the team to change. And I call the word is called porosity. I used to be I worked at a chemical engineering company, and I learned about the molecules are porous. Like this is less porous than the wood desk that I have. The wood desk is more porous, absorptive. You need to make people porous. What opens people is, first of all, psychological safety. And if they see you serving them, so one by one, have conversations with people and say, hey, what's going on in your life? How can I be helpful? Anything I can do? And you could start on the professional basis and move to the personal, being empathetic and understanding, etc. Right? So just letting people know that you care and that you want to be of service. And that is the beginning of an opening. Then you could start being vulnerable, right? So, you work from, people are busy. I talk about it in the book. I wish it weren't true, but you can't just walk up to somebody and say, I want to be your friend. They don't have time, right? So you got to lead with generosity. And that's been a tenet of my work ever since I remember. But as soon as you get somebody's attention, because they understand that you want to be helpful. And by the way, this is tough for some of us because some of us are scared shitless and all we want to do is protect ourselves. We think we have a scarcity mindset and we think that we just got to take care of number one first. And that is an understandable belief, particularly in the fear that's going on in the world today and the situation we're in. But you personally need to step out of that if you're going to be a good leader. You as a scarce, and I know scarcity. My old man was an unemployed steel worker in the 70s. You know, my dad, we didn't have money to put food on the table, literally. I mean, once unemployment insurance was out and the steel industry was crashing around us, unemployment ran out, the government gave you welfare cheese. You know, it was our relatives that gave us money for food, right? My aunts and uncles. And that was embarrassing to my parents and to me. And my mom had to become a cleaning lady, which she didn't want to do. I had to go work at the golf course for 20 bucks a day if I was lucky. And that was important money for the family. So like, I know scarcity and I have had to fight that all my damn life. Taking care of myself is something that has always been a first concern to me. But I've had to work against that to become a leader. Because if you lead with scarcity, you're not going to have followership. You might have compliance. You might get compliance. And that's, you know, and that's 60% of someone's heart, not 150% of someone's ability.
I think you make a good point there with the bridge, because you mentioned earlier, social media, the pictures that we have, it's all about, here's my best life, here's my car, here's the plane, here's this beautiful, right? Because obviously there's stuff they want you to believe.
Dude, Kyle, I've seen your Instagram. I know exactly what it looks like.
I thought we talked about that was going to be confidential. That's not. But so many of us do it in that way. And then I think at work, a lot of times, if you transpose it, they lead with that. And I'll include myself in it because I think that it's a human nature. When you first meet somebody or you're on a team, you want to be perceived a certain way. You want to be perceived as competent. You want to be perceived. It might be harder to step into that state of vulnerability. When people come in and they're like, hey, I'm amazing and I do all these things, I feel like we're less likely as human beings to want to open up and be caring for that person, right? So it takes longer until you actually know who they really are. Then you want to build as a team. And I think what you hit on right there is it's accelerating that, right? When you lead without authority, it's accelerating and going first, stepping forward as the leader with or without the title, to be able to get the team around the fact that, hey, we're all in this together. We're all a little bit messy, but what do we all need individually? And then what are we going after collectively on this team? Exactly.
Yeah. Good call.
There's a difference there between service-oriented leadership and generosity-oriented leadership. And I want to continue to think about our network, who's joining us. What does that look like? What can I do in my next meeting? What does it look like to create this sort of mindset? I'm going to build on your comments, Keith, just the understanding of going first and practicing the responsibility that I have, be the North Star, and reminding ourselves that questions mobilize hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Of literally asking, how do we want to show up here as leaders despite the circumstances? And
I think I don't want to have averted Kyle's question. This book was written for two audiences. The first audience was the executive or the positional leader. If you have a little bit of authority today, how do you really go big? And it's not by leaning on that. Don't lean on the little bit of authority you have looking to get more. You need to begin to ignore it and go really big. Go big, go broad, build the network and the team around you that could do extraordinary things, right? So that will make you extraordinary. That will make your project extraordinary. But the other person this is built for is the person sitting inside that team that has no positional authority, that thinks they have to wait to become a manager to be a leader. No, like literally right now, I've got people in my company that are leading extraordinarily important parts of my business. And they never had positional authority until they started acting as it. I was chief marketing officer at Deloitte before I was 30, worldwide. The head of marketing before I was 30. And I did that by leading without authority. The story's told in the book, but I identified the legacy that the CEO wanted to leave and I started doing my own research independently of what it meant to build a world-class professional services marketing organization, because he wanted to have Deloitte be at par with Accenture and McKinsey. And so at the time it was called Anderson Consulting. And so I went and I did a research project on my own of what they did to achieve that. And I presented it to the CEO. And the next thing you know, I was on a marketing project. And I told him, I said, listen, if I do a kick-ass job, will you make me CMO? He said, no, of course not. There's no way, because you need to be a partner to be chief marketing officer of this company. You're a child, you're in your 20s. And I said, all right, fine. So I just kept doing it. And I just kept doing it. And ultimately, I was the youngest partner ever elected at Deloitte in history. And I was chief marketing officer before I was 30. So I know it's doable. And don't tell me that, oh, you don't understand what kind of a company. Bullshit. That's an excuse. That's one of the 6 deadly excuses.
Excellent. Kyle, we've got time for one more question from the network, and then we'll be coming back with a few final thoughts.
Ooh, one last one. So I'm going to combine 2, which is kind of cheating, but I don't care. I'm going to do it quickly. So we had one that asked if you have any resources, Keith, that you would point to for somebody to become a better leader, especially with what you're talking about right now. And then the follow-up question, which I think is really good, is authority blinding. So, and I think, and this is from Maria Lucy, is authority blinding, probably reading into that, people in positional authority, is that blinding?
Well, look, I mean, depends on, your insecurity levels. I mean, how grounded are you? And if you let, I tell a story in the book about my days at Starwood. I was blinded as a leader at Starwood. I had fought so hard to be a leader at Deloitte that by the time I went to Starwood, and I was chief marketing officer at Starwood. And by the time I went there, they give me full authority, big title, big authority, lots of budget, etc. I thought I had arrived, and I flipped from the kid who earned his way into leadership into the person who got lazy in it. And I didn't serve. There's a story about not having served the president of Europe at the time, because I was more interested in scraping his budget out from underneath him and driving the marketing agenda worldwide, because I thought I had some positional authority and some moral reason to do so. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Bottom line is I was wrong. And so yeah, it can be blinding. I was an insecure, scarcity-minded kid. And you've got to work on yourself as a human, whether you use meditation, spirituality, whatever the heck you do personally that gets you grounded. That's important to make sure that you're the kind of leader you need to be. The first question though, Kyle, was what? It was the second one was about the, I remember there was, oh yeah, what resources?
What resources?
I negotiated this with Kyle and Craig. I don't know where this exists right now. We'll have to figure it out, Kyle. But I filmed 10 modules, video modules that go along with this book, coaching modules. And we're giving those away for free between now and next Tuesday. And so those are available to you guys. Kyle, I don't know how you do this with this team. It's probably at ferrazzilearning.com, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
We've got that website coming up on a slide, and then Cheryl Lynn will put it in the chat space for us.
Good. Whatever it is, there's a set of videos I created because it's important to an author that the pre-orders are done before the book launches on the 26th. And then, because that week is really important to things like New York Times lists, et cetera. So we wanted to create an additional motivation. And then after that, that course will be sold, but it's free until the 26th. So I think that'll be a good resource for you.
I'll find that link and we'll get it out to everybody that's on this call. So I appreciate that. That's
talk to Dylan to make sure that, because there's a direct landing page that all you got to do is enter that you bought the book, and then it downloads the videos for you.
Gotcha.
Good. Keith, you said something there that I want to extend as a challenge to the network, so we can continue to walk away with actionable items. This idea of being blinded by authority, Kyle, that question. If we as professionals don't have at least one person who's giving us honest feedback, and then the second part of that is us suspending our beliefs as whether that feedback is true or not, and just imagining that it's true. If we don't have that, Keith, I'm with you. We're going to be blinded, and it's our responsibility to, of course, being open to that feedback. And so a challenge to everybody in the network, who's that person who's giving you that feedback on your potential blind spots, and what action are you taking? Keith,
Craig, there's a whole chapter in the book about co-development. I originally started writing the book because I believed that within every relationship we have in the workplace should be an assumption of coaching. And I believe as a leader, you need to unleash coaching among your team. Coaching among your team.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. We're going to come back and finish things up with our insight in an instant. I know several of you have looked forward to that, and many of you participate in the chat space with that. Before we hear Keith's insight and Kyle's and mine, there are the resources in front of you right there in the slide. You can see Keith's book there at the bottom, Leading Without Authority, launched on May 26th. Encourage you to pre-order that. And Keith, again, thank you for the generous offer, Leading with Generosity, Walking the Talk with those videos. Of course, there's the various global resources that many of you are familiar with. Before we get to the insight in an instant as well, I want to announce on our next Collaborative Leaders Huddle, very excited, we're going to have CEO, President of Tillamook, Patrick Kreitzer. Our big question for that particular huddle, how do you get others to go all in on new plans, especially during this time of uncertainty and volatility where organizations of course have to evolve their plans? Patrick's going to give us some keen insights on that, some actionable items. All right, insights in an instant. Kyle, we're going to start with you. I'll share mine. We'll wrap it up with Keith's, and then we'll sign off.
Perfect. First of all, Keith, thank you so much. You have great insights. I wish we had several hours, but really, really good stuff, and always raw and authentic, which I'm a massive fan of. The biggest insight that I received really was stepping forward in generosity. And I think, depending on where you are in your career, we've all had the ego kind of step into play. We all either worked really hard and then we got to a place where we maybe got entitled, or the ego stepped into place and then we had to recheck ourselves. And being able to step forward in generosity and looking at that in stark contrast to scarcity, I think is, as a leader or as a teammate, that was the biggest insight that I got. So when we're thinking about others first, when we're stepping into like, how can I help and how can I serve you first, genuinely, and doing that versus the scarcity mindset, what can you do for me? I think that's a beautiful insight that I think everyone can take home. That's what I got. Excellent.
Thank you, Kyle. Yeah, for me, that whole idea of the mindset that you talked about at the very beginning, Keith, this idea of it's an invitation, and quit thinking about my team, your team, and that our teams, we're on 5 to 6 teams each, and that's an invitation that I'm inviting you, and as well, I'm invited to it. And what does that mean? If I'm going to invite someone into my home, how do I treat them? If I'm invited in someone's home, how do I treat them? That mindset was really key. That's my insight. Keith, how about you?
Well, I'd say there's an insight that I gained that I don't understand, and I want to follow up with you, Craig. What's the difference between servant leadership and leading with generosity? So I can't wait to hear offline. I'd love to hear more about that, or I'm really intrigued by that comment. But I would just say to everybody, look, everybody listening in, you deserve and can be a massively transformative leader. You really can. And the only thing that's holding you back are a set of mindsets and a set of practices of traditional leadership that are not working. They don't work. We have to be transformational. And to be transformational, you need to lead bigger, broader, bolder. And you can't do that alone. You need to do that inclusively. And that's the principle of co-elevation. I have 23 CEOs of major corporations who have signed off on this book as the next, as the methodology, the operating system for the new world of work. Some major folks that I have a lot of respect for. And I hope you'll begin to adopt that and stop leading in old ways. Stop leading in ways that are keeping you small.
Powerful message, Keith. Perfect way to wrap up our huddle. Thank you so much. Thank you to our collaborative leaders. We'll hopefully see you in 2 weeks. Remember, leadership matters, but only teams deliver. Thank you, everybody. Be safe.